Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Blue Bounty Hunter channel. Now, have you noticed the new Stormtrooper design from the Bad Batch? If so, you're probably wondering how the Empire went from that to the classic bad-aiming soldiers we know and love that were first introduced in the original trilogy. Well, in this video, I'll be breaking down every change the Emperor made to his army, starting from the Phase 1 Shinies straight off Kamino to even the First Order troopers that reigned after the days of the Empire. And I'm actually going to start off with the Phase 1 clone troopers. The clone army of Kamino was created by Chancellor Palpatine, also known as Darth Sidious, who was undercover to provide the Republic with an army to fight against the Separatists, which in turn would create a war to distract the Jedi. And Master Sifo Dyas ordered the army, which used the bounty hunter Jango Fett as a template for a clone army. When the Jedi strike team sent to rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi was outnumbered and surrounded by the Separatists at the Petronki Arena on Geonosis, Yoda arrived with the Phase 1 clone troopers to reinforce the battle. This catastrophic event would be known as the Battle of Geonosis. The Clone Wars lasted for 3 years from 22 BBY till 19 BBY, and the Phase 1 troopers were used for the first year or so of the war. The armor had similarities to Mandalorian Armor with its T-shaped visor that it would later become famous for, and it makes sense that they would want to kind of model it off of the Mandalorians, as they were a very powerful and infamous warrior race in the galaxy. The armor was apparently uncomfortable due to the Kaminoans' inexperience towards human anatomy and ergonomics. The armor was made of a lightweight plastoid alloy composite and was made up of 20 individual pieces that surrounded a black body glove that could briefly protect troopers from the vacuum of space, which you can actually see multiple times throughout the Clone Wars, such as when Plo Koon's troopers fight off the Battledroids in space, and it could also briefly protect them from extreme temperatures, whether hot or cold. For a brief time during Phase 1, colors on the armor were actually used to show rank, but this was quickly replaced when color started to be used to show Legion and Independence. What I mean by this is basically Jedi and other personnel could kind of identify their commanders and captains really quickly just due to their customization of their armor. And the armor was customizable with other additions like pauldrons, visors, and or macro binoculars, and the helmet had a comlink life support system and a tracking device. It's no wonder the clones were superior to the Battledroids, considering all the tech they had. I mean, it almost makes you feel bad for the droids. Almost. But now that I've gone over sort of the initial phase of clone troopers, I'll actually be going into the Phase 2 clone troopers. But like I said, the Phase 1 armor only lasted about a year, and in 21 BBY, the armor was slowly replaced by the Phase 2 armor, which had been tested by the Advanced Recon Commandos, or ARC troopers for short. The new armor was more comfortable, durable, and allowed for better adjustments for specialty troopers. Also, with this new armor, all clone legions start to be identified by different colors that covered their armor. For example, blue for the 501st, orange for the 212th, and camo for the 41st Elite Legion. Now obviously I could go into all of these as there is a bunch, but I'm pretty sure you guys know most of them anyways, so yeah. While the armor was lighter and more durable, it also cost much more than Phase 1 at a total of 3,000 credits per suit, which was much heavier than the cost of Phase 1 armor, which was just 2,000 credits per suit. When the Empire started in 19 BBY after Order 66, when the clones followed the order to kill all the Jedi in the galaxy, the clones would be used for many more years, even until 16 BBY, when they were then slowly moved out to be replaced by the next trooper in town. And speaking of which, now that I've gone over all the different clone variants, we'll actually be moving into what you saw in the thumbnail of this video, as well as what I was talking about at the beginning of the video, which is of course the Generation 1 Stormtroopers from the most recent Bad Batch episodes that were also known as TK Troopers. And when Governor Tarkin, as well as Admiral Rampart decided that the cost of clones was not efficient, they then started Project War Mantle to start deploying conscripted non-clone soldiers to use instead of the costly clones. After a meeting with Lama Su, the Prime Minister of Kamino, Rampart put Crosshair, the only loyal member of Clone Force 99 left, in charge of 4 of the first Stormtroopers, where their first mission was to wipe out Saw Gerrera's rebels on the moon of Onderon, as well as the traitorous civilians that were helping them. The trooper, ES-01, was executed by Crosshair after refusing to kill unarmed civilians. But other than that, the mission was a success, which led to 1,000 recruits being trained at a facility on Daro under veteran clone commandos like Gregor, who actually ended up quitting and was then held at that facility. These first generation Stormtroopers, or TK Troopers as I mentioned earlier, that was actually their official name, and they were used throughout the first years of the Empire. They also had similar armor to the Phase 2 Clone Troopers, but with a different single visor that was not T-shaped like previous models. The summit of the helmet contained a raised ridge that went from the visor to the back of the helmet. The DC-15A blaster carbine was the standard blaster used by these troopers. But now that I've briefly touched on the TK troopers from the Bad Batch, I'll actually be going into the standard Stormtroopers you know quite well from Star Wars. And eventually, sometime after 16 BBY, the Phase 2 clones and TK troopers were replaced by the new and improved Stormtroopers, which would be used by the Empire from the dark times that Obi-Wan mentioned in A New Hope till the destruction of the Empire at the Battle of Jakku. The advantages of the Stormtroopers was that they were not nearly as costly as the former troopers, as they were volunteered, and they also had a nearly endless amount of troopers as they came from all corners of the galaxy. The standard troopers carried an E-11 medium blaster rifle and were named Stormtroopers after the storm of galactic history. So good luck figuring that one out. The troopers were infamous for their poor aim, which was caused by their lackluster helmets, which were hard to see through. And this is kind of where they get the name Bucket Heads from the animated series Star Wars Rebels, which I would actually recommend seeing as it is quite a good show. Many different specialty troopers were made to enforce the Empire in specific situations, such as the Sand Trooper, which fought on desert planets such as Tatooine, also the Snow Trooper, which was created for operations on freezing ice planets such as Hoth, and also the Scout Trooper, which was an advanced trooper for intel missions that often came equipped with a speeder bike for fast escapes. The specialty troopers also included shore troopers, range troopers, patrol troopers, death troopers, and even dark troopers. Obviously there's a bunch more I could mention, but I do not plan on doing that in this video. The Empire had a large navy of Star Destroyers and TIE Fighters that were manned by pilots and officers alike. The Stormtrooper armor was made up of a similar material to the clone suits before them that were in some cases actually recycled for the new Stormtrooper variants. While the armor protected the troopers from mild blaster fire and extreme weather, it also made running even harder with the plated material and was no use against blunt weapons too. But to finish off the video, I'm actually going to go into what happened to the armor of these troopers, as well as the troopers themselves after the Empire. And when the Empire was defeated at the Battle of Jakku in 5 ABY, which stands for after the Battle of Yavin, in case you are not familiar with the term, the use of Stormtrooper armor became irrelevant, and the Empire was all but in the past. But when Kylo Ren rose to power and started the First Order with Snoke and Grand Admiral Hux, new Stormtroopers that were trained from birth, known as the First Order Stormtroopers, were used in combat against the Resistance and other supporters of the New Republic. In a way, the First Order armor was a crossover of all the previous armies, as it had similar qualities to each the clone armor and Stormtrooper armor. Also, the flexibility of the armor was increased from former variants. The helmet had a Bataplast finish and had both targeting as well as communication systems for the troopers. The helmets had a constant stream of data, which showed the amount of ammo left in their blasters, as well as ID for other troopers when they would walk by. And this was all, of course, stored in the lenses of their helmets. Later, an army consisting of a red variant of the First Order Stormtrooper, known as the Sith Troopers, was raised for the Final Order, but was quickly destroyed at the Battle of Exegol in 35 ABY. So the troopers over time basically just had small modifications here and there to their armor to best suit the Republic, Empire, and even First Order. Now, before I end the video, I actually want to give a quick shout out to my big 20-minute ranking video. It's actually coming out this Sunday, and basically in that video, I explore my thoughts on each of the Star Wars films and where I would actually rank them if I was to put all of them next to each other. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. I upload every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I also post shorts on Saturday. But yeah, see ya. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Blue Bounty Hunter channel. Now, with the first episodes of The Mandalorian Season 3 putting more and more emphasis on the culture of Mandalore, I thought it would be a good time to dive into the armor that defines these infamous warriors, going over how it changed over time and every variation to the armor, as well as how the Mandalorian history shaped their most defining feature. And starting with the origins of the Mandalorians, the revered warriors existed for around 10,000 years, starting close to 9,991 BBY. The history of Mandalore starts with the Taung, which were a humanoid species originating from the core world planet of Coruscant. After being driven from the planet by another warrior race known as the Zell, the Taung, led by Mandalore the First, would eventually travel to a new planet, and then a new one after that in the Outer Rim, which they would name Mandalore after their leader. This planet was unoccupied other than the large, intimidating creatures known as the Mythosaurs, which would later become extinct. And these beasts were so important to the Mandalorians who hunted them that they would become a symbol of Mandalorian culture, literally. And obviously you can see this throughout the Mandalorian show, as well as other elements of Star Wars. The Taung started to accept other species as Mandalorians too, which significantly changed their culture as a whole. The Taung species was gray-skinned, strong with yellow eyes and bony ridges on their skulls, and they were well over 6 feet on average, so they were said to be about 2 meters on average, and they would be later known as the progenitors. These progenitors actually started the use of Mandalorian armor with their unique masks that were shaped to their faces. And other than the masks, however, the Taung believed in sparse armor, and they thought it was the most honorable way to combat opponents. During the Sith Wars and eventually the era of the Old Republic, the Mandalorians conquered more and more worlds, creating their own Mandalorian sector. And due to their powerful leaders, this led to the Taungs eventually being eclipsed by their fellow warriors as they fought more and more wars. Honestly, I feel like these guys probably had OCD or something. Like, every time they see a planet they haven't enslaved, their immediate instinct is to just conquer it without thinking. I guess you really couldn't catch a break in those days. But now that I've gone over their origins a little bit, I'll be diving into the Neo Crusaders, who are basically like the first variant of Mandalorians and the first version of the Mandalorians that had some cool armor. But as the Jedi rose to power in the Old Republic, the Mandalorians started a galactic event known as the Mandalorian Wars, which were fought between the protectors of the Republic and the warriors of Mandalore. This led to new armor being required over that of the primitive Taung coverings. This created the Neo Crusader armor, which was harder and stronger than the previous Crusader models that came before for it. Colors were actually used to show ranks. Blue indicated a recruit or anyone without a leadership position. Red indicated a rally master, and gold was for field marshals. The Neo Crusader Shock Trooper was a later variant of the armor, and these shock troopers were for conflicts where the form of battle was somewhat unknown, such as in underground tunnels, congested urban areas, or even spacecraft. The Shock Trooper armor was customized to many extreme uses, such as spending over 24 hours in space, which is pretty crazy if you ask me. They were also equipped with electro binoculars, jetpacks, personal energy shields, and even vibroblades. So basically the shock troopers of these Neo Crusaders were even more complex and powerful than just the standard Crusaders themselves. While the Mandos and Jedi fought for millennia, there is actually an example of how the two came together. And around 10,050 BBY, the Mandalorian Tar Vizsla became a Jedi, and to show his Mandalorian independence, created his own lightsaber known as the Darksaber. After his death, the Jedi recovered the blade and stored it in their temple. Unfortunately, the Mandalorians would later strike the Republic at its heart and take back the Darksaber from the temple, which would make it a symbol of leadership in their people. But now, I'll actually be moving into the next phase of Mandalorian armor, which kind of came with the Death Watch and this new Super Commando type armor. Standard Mandalorian armor was made of Beskar or Beskargam in their language, which translated to iron skin. Although some like Jango Fett and Boba Fett used Durasteel in their armor, which was less valuable, and while less durable, it was still usable. But do note that those two characters of course still had Beskar in their armor, they just also had some Durasteel. Around the time of the final conflict between the Jedi and the Mandalorians, which led to the cataclysmic event that turned Mandalore's surface into a barren, uninhabitable wasteland of a desert, the armor would morph into the Mandalorian Super Commando, which had a sleeker design with less bulky armor and the classic T-shaped visor. The armor actually consisted of a smaller plated armor linked together by a thin crafted layer of protection that was easier to maneuver in. Also, like the previous Neo Crusader shock troopers, this new form of armor came equipped with multiple weapon additions to it, like wrist rockets, flamethrowers, personal energy shields, jetpacks, and more. The list goes on. With this new armor and the defeat of Mandalore, the remaining Mandalorian traditionalists were split into multiple factions with their own unique armor. These groups included the Death Watch with their gray and blue armor that were viewed as terrorists. Also, female Mandalorians like the Night Owls existed during this time, and they had their own unique armor with differently shaped visors and armor to match their build. Also, a crimson-clad group known as Maul's Super Commandos were created to fight against the Mandalore resistance led by Bo-Katan when Maul rose to power with his Shadow Collective alongside Pre Vizsla, who he ended up fighting and killing to take over Mandalore. These red Super Commandos were led by Gar Saxon, who had horns on his armor to entice fear into his foes. By the Clone Wars, Mandalorians wore symbols and other signs of their clan or other affiliation, and while sometimes the warrior would just pick a color they liked in general, sometimes in Legends at least, these colors were known to imply these ideas. Gray meant mourning a lost love, red was honoring a parent, black for justice, gold for vengeance, green for duty, blue for reliability, orange a lust for life, and white was supposed to represent a new start. But now moving into the Empire era, when the Empire took over the galaxy in 19 BBY and the planet of Mandalore was seized, the Super Commando Gar Saxon became the Imperial Viceroy, who alongside his fellow commandos wore a new, sleeker design of armor created by by the Empire to show the warriors' new status against any non-loyal Mandalorians. This armor was white and red with a different visor than the previous Mandalorian Super Commando variant. The armor was even tied closer to the Empire, as it had obvious visual similarities to Stormtrooper armor, especially with the white coloration and everything. But when the Empire's forces at Mandalore were defeated by Ezra, Sabine Wren, and Bo-Katan, they realized they wouldn't be able to take control again, and then commenced the Great Purge of Mandalore, which ravaged the planet's surface with the TIE bombers. One Mandalorian tribe that was afflicted with the Children of the Watch was hiding in an enclave on the planet of Navarro, but was forced to leave after they tried to help their fellow Mandalorian Din Djarin escape from Imperials. The Children of the Watch was a sect of modern Mandos that believed in never taking their helmet off, as well as many other rules from the ancient way of Mandalore that had become outnumbered by the other Mandalorians who had altered the rules over time. Din Djarin, who was a member of this sect, originally had his own unique Durasteel armor that he then transformed into a full silver set of Beskar armor that made him a highly durable and powerful foe in battle. Other than this, his armor was pretty standard with a T-shaped visor and all except for one of his pauldrons, which showed his Mudhorn signet. The armorer was another member of this sect that had her own unique gold helmet with the small round female visor as well as 5 small horns at the top. She also wore bronzium armor and a fur coat, and was also equipped with many weapons including a gravity hammer and tongs, and you can actually see her using this against enemies in The Mandalorian. In Legends, in 130 ABY, by the Second Imperial Civil War, new, powerfully designed armor was worn by Mandalorians including Hondo Kar and Tez Vivek, which had a new, segmented look and a unique visor. So the Mandalorians really just changed their armor over the millennia, to be honest, and it went from these, crazy looking huge Neo-Crusaders to the more sleek and modern designs like the Death Watch. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. I upload every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I also post shorts on Saturday. But yeah, see ya. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Blue Bounty Hunter channel. So spoilers for The Mandalorian Season 3, but with the return of Moff Gideon, we have been re-exposed to the same red guards that were first seen in Snoke's throne room during The Last Jedi. Now you might also remember the blue Senate guards from the era of the Clone Wars that Palpatine would rarely be seen without, and it turns out there's actually a very interesting and drawn out process of these warriors as they changed from the boys in blue of the Republic to the Praetorian guards that had armor that could sometimes even deflect lightsabers. With blue robes, a large helmet that had an open faceplate, and a ceremonial plume that stood atop their heads, the Senate guards were armed with blue colored armor underneath their robes, as well as the MK2 Paladin blaster rifle, and they also had access to a number of other weapons like force pikes, DC-15As, and wooden stocked DC-15s. These guards served as a military force for the Republic in the last centuries of the Republic, as before the Clone Wars they were the only protection for the Senate district aside from the Jedi. They had an organized military structure that was enforced by the captain of the guard, who was overseen by the Senate committee that was of themselves advised by members of the judicial department, and members of the guard would start out as privates but could move up to corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and then last but not least, commander. The guards stood throughout the halls of the Senate buildings, as well as in close proximity to whoever was the current chancellor, and were referred to as the Senate Guard, Blue Guard, Republic Guard, Defenders of Democracy, and even the Boys in Blue. I wonder if I would classify as one of the Boys in Blue. I mean, probably not though, considering that I killed a bunch of them in 21 BBY. Don't worry guys, I meant to have my blaster on stun. It was just a silly mistake on my part. The bravest members of the Senate Guard would become the Senate Commandos that were used more during the final years of the Republic moving into the Clone Wars, and these troopers lacked the extravagant robes of the Senate Guards and instead had just the blue armor underneath, which was more flexible and ready for battle than the other class. The Senate Commando captains were equipped with a large scabbard similar to a shoulder pad on their armor that was covered with the Senate seal. So apparently there was actually some corruption within the Senate Guards, and you can kind of see this in the Clone Wars Season 1 when that one captain helps out Asajj Ventress.
I'll tell him myself.
Also, towards the end of the Clone Wars, normal Senate Guards would start to wear the ceremonial robes even less, in a manner that exposed their armor below, and all helmets, whether Senate Guard or Senate Commando, were equipped without the plume and with a dark visor in the once open faceplate. Most of what I'm covering in this video is tied to the Republic, Empire, or First Order, all coming back to Palpatine in some way or another. There actually were other examples of royal guards throughout the galaxy. For example, the Hynastian royal guards were the protectors of the royal family on the planet Hynastia under the captain Twyla. Also, the Thespian royal guard was a team of force-sensitive warriors that served the blood monarch of Thespius, a puzzle of intertwining Thespian puzzle rings that were twisted in a way that would look like snakes, were used to determine whether or not volunteers were attuned to the Force. Aru blades were curved sabers that spread out in a half circle from the fists of these guards that were used during a bygone era due to changing attitudes of the Thespian culture, although it was still quite efficient. Next up, the Zygerian Royal Guard was a force of warriors that protected the Zygerian Queen and ensured dominance over the slaves and interests of Zygeria, and they also traveled and defended in HH-87 Starhoppers. Other royal guards throughout the galaxy included the Pijal Royal Guard, the Geonosian Royal Guard of Poggle the Lesser, the Mandalorian Protectors, and the Imperial Royal Commandos and Royal Guard droids of the Empire. But speaking of the Empire, towards the end of the Clone Wars, Palpatine formed his own unit of Red Guards that he began to favor over his former Blue Guards, which became known as his Royal Guards. When the Empire formed and the Senate Guard was dissolved, the galaxy made way for the new Imperial Royal Guards that enforced Palpatine's will alongside the new Stormtroopers. And while many were freshly picked for the new cause, some of the most notably loyal members of the previous Guard were actually allowed to transition into Imperial Senate Guards, which basically looked like a blue, heavily armored version of the Guards of Palpatine that you know quite well. These Imperial Senate Guards actually appeared in the game Star Wars: The Force Unleashed and fought against Starkiller, who was Vader's apprentice in Legends multiple times. Later during the Galactic Civil War, the Imperial Museum housed multiple museum guards that wore similar garb to the ancient armor of the Blue Guards of the Republic who handled vibro pikes. The Imperial Royal Guards were utilized as a security force for Coruscant during the first days of Palpatine's reign whenever he resided there, and these warriors were actually inspired from the Thyrus Sun Guards, which was a group of mercenaries that fought for the Republic during the Clone Wars. Also, a a group of the guards was stationed at Inquisitorius headquarters on Coruscant, where new Inquisitors were trained by Sidious as well as Vader. One of the two important incidents of these royal guards in conflict was when 3 Imperial guards without their robes were aboard Grand Admiral Thrawn's flagship, the Chimera, who were ordered by Palpatine to kill Ezra Bridger after his plans to open the World Between Worlds failed. So they tried to hold him in place while stormtroopers actually shot at Ezra, but were ultimately crushed by some rocks Ezra had thrown with the Force. The other occasion was when Luke entered the Emperor's throne room in Return of the Jedi, and many Imperial guards were seen monitoring the station, and in the deleted scene where Darth Vader force chokes Moff Jerjerrod, 2 guards are seen trying to stop Vader from entering the lair of Sidious. They were completely covered in a red hue of flowing robes and armor, which came in 2 variants: the robed look, which is sported by the guards in Episode 6, as well as the many other adaptations of the warriors, and then also a version stripped of their robes with just the armor showing, which is seen in many Legends comics and of course Star Wars Rebels. The guards were also known to wield electrostaffs like Magna Guards of the CIS, force pikes, and a staff-like weapon with a vibro edge head. However, blasters weren't completely absent from their arsenal, especially on the battlefield, where they would use the T-21 light repeating blaster, smart rocket, and the homing shot. Another fun fact about these soldiers is that they were required to be at least 1.83 meters or 6 feet, and were also some of the only individuals Palpatine trusted with his identity as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. Now, while right now I'm just talking about a bunch of the canon stuff as well as their appearance and whatnot, they actually have a lot more interesting backstory and details in Legends that I won't be going too much into in this video, but basically just know that they are extremely powerful and get trained by Darth Vader in so many different ways of combat. But other than the guards of Jilla Shale and Grand Admiral Ray Sloane, the Imperial guards were all but forgotten after the Battle of Endor. The Shadow Council, which was featured in The Mandalorian Season 3 Episode 7, was comprised of remnants of the Empire and hosted multiple delegations that secretly thwarted the progress of the New Republic while trying to increase their own power and influence throughout the galaxy. When Moff Gideon, who was a member of the council, asked for Praetorian guards, his wish was delivered when Commandant Brindle Hux and Captain Gilad Palion sent him a batch of these deadly guards. The Praetorian guards of Moff Gideon sported a new form of red armor, which had qualities of Mandalorian armor present in their helmets, and they also held weapons known as vibro abrid blades capable of piercing and electrocuting through Beskar alloy, as is seen when they face off against and ultimately kill Paz Vizsla after a scuffle with some Mandalorians led by Din Djarin and Bo-Katan near the Great Forge of Mandalore. Later, these warriors of the Shadow Council would be used as inspiration to create the elite Praetorian Guards of Snoke and the First Order that were designed by director of The Last Jedi Rian Johnson to look more like samurai and less ceremonial than the previous royal guards of the Empire. Snoke's guard consisted of 8 guards, all known by their names like First Guard, Second Guard, and so forth. And this group of elite protectors had a thrilling fight with Kylo Ren after he successfully killed Supreme Leader Snoke, and alongside the scavenger turned Jedi Rey, the two were able to defeat and kill each and every one of the Royal Guard, who admittedly put up a good fight, but were killed in many ways, like being cut through repeatedly by Rey, and also being disintegrated by Kylo Ren, like the Second Guard, who was thrown into an air vent below. Alongside a plastoid helmet, the Praetorian Guards had a high-tech onion skin laminate that had conductive wire paths, which would create an intense local magnetic field that could deflect blaster fire and even some poorly aimed lightsaber strikes, and the plates were also expensive and uncomfortable to wear. This later variant of the original Praetorian Guard also came equipped with vibro abrid blades and also weapons like the Bellari Electro Chain Whip, Vibro Volges, and Electro Bacintos. And while I did say that the armor is pretty effective against like bad lightsaber strikes that aren't really striking straight at it, as you can see in The Last Jedi, if someone plants a really good strike, they can pierce the armor. These guards were trained in intense melee and martial arts for the inevitable day when they would have to face off against a lightsaber wielder. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. I upload every Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I also post shorts on Saturday. But yeah, see ya. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Blue Bounty Hunter channel. And stop right now and picture this. Stormtroopers. Love or hate them, they are in all of our Star Wars filled lives, as they reinforce the will of the Empire, or more specifically, whatever random officer is stationed with them. And I'm also sure you can picture every variant of Stormtrooper. I mean, it's just Sand Troopers, Snow Troopers, and Scout Troopers, right? Wrong. While I will touch on some of those more well-known soldiers towards the end of the video, I'm going to start by diving straight into some of the craziest types out there. And starting with the Lava Troopers, these were troopers stationed on Vader's fortress on Mustafar that had black armor with red lines on their helmets and also came equipped with E11 medium blaster rifles, and most of the Lava Troopers wore full red pauldrons, but the sergeants could be recognized by just a simple red stripe on theirs, which would help to keep order in the Darth Slayer. Next up, Magma Troopers, who are, quite similar to the Lava Troopers, were deployed on volcanic mining planets like Mustafar, Solist, and Shu Torun to help with construction of Imperial bases, as well as protection against local uprisings. Their armor consisted of normal yet worn down white armor that was extremely resistant to the hot and deadly conditions, and also contained a respirator that connected through a tube to a backpack that would help against volcanic ash as well as smoke and other toxic gases. So for the Jump Troopers, who are also known as Imperial Jet or Rocket Troopers, these bucket heads could maneuver in aerial combat as well as the vacuum of space with their jetpacks that could hold them in the air for a decent period of time, and also their RT-97C blasters, missile launchers, and tubes that could sometimes connect to their backpack. These troopers were seen in Star Wars Rebels fighting against some of the Mandalore resistance led by Sabine Wren and Ezra Bridger. Flame Troopers used a flamethrower in battle against local fauna, which means the animal life of a region, as well as enemy forces that ran off a combustible fuel source that could spew up to 10 meters and required a cooldown after extended use. The Kashyyyk variant that was featured in Jedi Fallen Order had a more unique design with a comma and a lower set mouth, while the Agaris type was more similar to that of a snowtrooper and had pure white armor with a hint of maroon on the shoulders and helmet. And I don't know if this is just me, but I always thought that these were the most annoying enemies to face off against in Fallen Order, because as soon as you'd run up to them, they just blast your health away with their flamethrowers. But I guess it makes sense, as they were deployed against those big spider guys and slugs, as they were equally annoying. Next up, we have Artillery Troopers, also known as Mortar Troopers, and these guys came equipped with yellow markings and a yellow pauldron over their standard armor, as well as a backpack with equipment like thermal detonators, and were specialized in using the Mur-San Munitions Model 201 mortar, which from cover would shoot at a high angle to strike enemies at calculated points below. These soldiers were deployed on the planet Tython by Moff Gideon as part of the Imperial Remnants group. And the red equivalent of the Mortar Trooper was the Incinerator Trooper, which carried D-72W oppressor flame projectors and also received intense fire combat training and had armor with a cyroplast coat, which could hold up in extreme temperatures, and they used their weapons to cremate the bodies of enemies as well as the structures around them. An incinerator trooper was deployed on Navarro in 9 ABY against Din Djarin and his band of insurgents. I don't really see why the Empire found it necessary to have flame troopers and incinerator troopers when they both do literally the same thing, but I guess Vader really had a thing for fire. Oh. And our next special trooper is the Sea Trooper that worked in aquatic environments with DC-12U beam rifles and OMS Devilfish submarines, and had propulsion jets, flippers on their boots, as well as breathing tubes that connected to their backpack that sat atop their slightly modified Stormtrooper armor. And they were stationed on Mon Cala during the Battle of Dock City, and were also present on Lothal for underwater training programs for Imperial cadets. And for the Stormtrooper Grenadier, they had a Class A thermal detonator, which were launched from these troopers' grenade launchers that could demolish a rebel force below. And a red symbol was ingrained on their right shoulder plate, as well as a bandolier which ran down their chest. On the jungle planet Koyurti, the Stormtrooper Grenadiers participated in a campaign against the Alliance to restore the Republic. And the other canon versions of random Stormtroopers included Crimson Stormtroopers, Forest Troopers, Heavy Weapons Troopers, Imperial Heavy Troopers, Storm Commandos, Imperial Shock Troopers, Riot Control Troopers, Shadow Troopers, Swamp Troopers, and Wet Weather Gear Stormtroopers. But speaking of Stormtroopers, next up we have the standard Stormtrooper that all these other variants stem from, which were conscripted soldiers who replaced the previous clone and TK armies before them, and had armor that was made up of white plastoid plates with a black body glove underneath that was meant to show no color to prevent personalities developing in troopers that were intended to be mindless brutes or foot soldiers of the cause. They had E11 medium blasters like everyone else, and HUD, which stands for heads up display, as well as of course a utility belt. For our next well-known variant of Stormtrooper, we have the Snow Trooper. They had insulated armor to keep them warm, and a heated breather mask powered by a battery pack that lasted about 2 standard weeks, and also ice boots as well as a comma, which were very important on the planets they operated on, like Hoth. Their tech included snow goggles, grappling hooks, ion flares, and what's that? They also used E11 blasters. I didn't ask. Sorry, I'm getting tired about hearing of these boring rifles all day, if you know what I mean. Next up, we have Sand Troopers, and their helmets were augmented with cooling fans as well as a sand filter in their helmets, and extra rations and food were stored in their survival backpacks, and they had many weapons such as the T-21 light repeating blaster, and the Sand Troopers of Tatooine, among other desert strongholds, were trained in the ways of desert combat and living conditions. Scout Troopers were used in a wide span of mostly reconnaissance missions and were lightly armored for maneuverability, which only covered their torso, lower legs, and helmet, which itself had electromagnetic vision for scouting ahead, hence the name, and it also could fold back unlike other Stormtrooper helmets. So me personally, I hate the way that these helmets fold back. I mean, especially because these are like my favorite Stormtroopers. I think the design is just really cool, and I like all the places that they operate on, like indoor, but I've always just not liked the way their helmets fold back in Rebels and stuff, so yeah, but that's just my opinion. The Scout Troopers also heavily utilized EC-17 holdout blasters and 74Z speeder bikes. Next up, we have Shore Troopers that could also be named as the Coastal Guard and Coastal Defender Stormtroopers that were organized from the Coastal Defense Division and were on beach-like worlds like Scarif to defend and uphold the Empire on even the furthest stretches of land. There was at least 3 ranks of this branch, with some like captains and squad leaders which had blue markings on their armor, and they used many different weapons including the E-22 reciprocating double-barreled blaster rifle. Ranged troopers were fitted with a very unique set of armor which helped them in battle alongside their E-10R blaster rifles, Kryptonian boots, and fur-covered chest plates. And also from Solo were these police-like officers known as patrol troopers that moved around on CPH patrol speeder bikes that allowed them to control dense urban areas like the downtown areas of Corellia. The Death Trooper was an elite soldier that was effective at espionage, lethality, and brute skill and force that protected many projects surrounding the construction of the Death Star, and had weapons like the E-11D blaster carbine, C-25 fragmentation grenades, and smart rockets. And next up we have the Space Trooper, which were specialized stormtroopers equipped with rebreather packs that were designed for zero-G conditions, that were equipped with standard blasters and thermal detonators, and they were also stationed aboard the Chimera as well as the Death Star throughout the age of the Empire. And the Space Troopers were actually set to appear in Rogue One during the space sequence with Darth Vader, which would have been very cool, but this was later changed to just normal stormtroopers for that scene. And second to last, we have the Dark Trooper, and the Dark Trooper armor underwent 4 different phases, with the last 2 being overseen by Moff Gideon, and these were experimental combat droids used by Imperials that originally housed a human in a dark encasing of a suit. But to end off the video, we have Purge Troopers, which were dark armored troopers with similar designs to the airborne division of Phase 2 clone troopers that served alongside the Inquisitors to find and kill Jedi throughout the galaxy that used electro staffs, electro hammers, and electro batons. So that's a lot of troopers, but I hope you could take all that information in, and I hope you enjoyed something in this video. Let me know if you want me to do like another version of this where I go over every variant in Legends, because there is a bunch more and a bunch arguably more interesting versions in Legends, but I just thought that'd be too much to cover in this video alone. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. I upload every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I also post shorts on Saturday. But yeah, see ya. Battle droids were the infantry soldiers of the CIS, or Separatists, used for their humanoid form, which allowed them to operate weapons and machinery, and also their low cost, which could increase production. But what if I told you that there were battle droids before and after the Clone Wars, with unique designs like the Sky Troopers of the Eternal Empire in Legends, and even the terrifying custom red droid used by Snap Wexley, known as Mr. Bones? And I'll leave it up to you to figure out why he was called that.
And here I thought this mission would be unpleasant.
Starting around 25,000 BBY, Zim the Despot had his own Guardian Corps, also known as Zim War Droids, that were humanoid in form and nearly twice the height of a standard protocol droid, which is also the same size as a human. That is the protocol droid. These guys were much bigger. They were influenced by Rakatan droid designs. The highest ranking of the droids, called the Crimson Condottiers, not even gonna try and say that right, used force energizing dynamos like the Rakata before them, which basically meant the technology was driven by the force, and thick armored plating with a reflective surface to deflect blaster bolts, and also reinforced stress points were advantages of these guys. Chemical and energy weapons like ancient heat beams and particle dischargers were built into the arms and hands of the droids, and these ancient droids were very tall and bulky with the skull emblem of Zim on their chest breastplates with a box-like head and blocky feet too. Apparently they could be summoned by like horns of some kind, which doesn't really make sense to me because you'd think if they have the technology to make these complex droids, they could use something better than like a horn. With that said, it is still crazy to me that they could make these kinds of droids all this far back on the timeline. So yeah, I think Star Wars really does have to explore some of the early lore and legend stuff as far as how technology worked back then. However, the reconstituted Sith Empire also had its own army of droids, which it used in its many conquests after the Great Hyperspace War. One of them was the PD-44 droid, aka the DX-2 Dominator droid, which resembled an early version of the Droideka, 3,630 years older to be exact, and this model was stationed on Taral 5 during the Cold War, as well as the coronet city of Corellia. And when I say the Cold War, no, I'm not talking about that thing with Russia in the 60s and 50s. I'm referring to the one from Star Wars. It appeared in the Old Republic game during a Trooper class mission to Corellia, and it also had one red eye in the center, as well as many pointy legs with red joints, and also 2 lasers on each arm, again very similar to the destroyer droids of later years. In a cinematic for the game, we can see them waddling around, so I'm not exactly sure whether or not these guys rolled, but I am sure that this is seen in the game at some point if I had to guess. Also, other droids of the Sith Empire include the Mark 7 experimental prototype assassin droid, the NRO-2, Darth Scrabus's HK droid, and lastly the M1 4X droid, which was itself armed with blasters, grenades, rockets, and a flamethrower. So is it just me, or does this droid seem like a good guy to hang out with? I mean, he feels like the type of friend you keep around for security, but no one really talks to. The M14X was designed to be loyal and very patriotic, as it would go to any length to destroy the enemies of the Republic that manufactured it. The largest droid was initially made by the Republic, but was briefly used by the Sith Empire, and found its origins when the project was abandoned due to the power core not activating. This droid was 654 pounds and was covered with white plating with red markings and yellow sensors. So obviously it is some sort of Republic droid, even though it is labeled as a Sith Empire droid. I think the thing is that it was just used very briefly by them, but yeah. So I mean, the Sith Empire already had those really cool troopers, but then they have to throw on the bow droids on top of it, so yeah, that seems like a really cool faction the more I learn about it. Next up, the Sky Troopers were a battle droid used by the Eternal Empire and later the Eternal Alliance that were manufactured on the planet Zakul and also on star fortresses because they replaced most of the Zakul organic military. The standard troopers were fitted with a blaster rifle and rocket boosters on the rear of its torso. Also, they had flamethrowers for burning down obstacles in their paths, or I should say attempting to burn down obstacles in their paths, because as you know, with droids, they're not always very reliable. A variant of these rambunctious rapscallions was the heavy sky troopers intended for planetary assaults, like the invasion of Voss. Also the siege troopers, which were more powerful and tall enough to face a walker. So yeah, these kids basically just look like huge mech suits, except they're not suits, they're just droids. And can you even imagine a separatist droid facing off against a walker? Yeah, that's not happening. Oh wait, tri-droids, that's right. I believe the sky troopers were about human-sized with rifles and gray armor with glowing blue sections as well, and were very important around 3600 BBY, so yet again another old head. Dr. Juvard Ilip Agurab reprogrammed the droids at the Overwatch control on Zakul after the Eternal Alliance rose from the Eternal Empire, and these mindless soldiers were sent out over the different planets for expansion of the Alliance. Also, the Sky Troopers had helmets that more closely resembled Stormtroopers than other battle droid models. They weren't just like some random machine piece that looks nothing like a human. They basically looked like people in suits, but they were in fact droids. And fun fact, before I talk about the B1 battle droids everyone knows, did you know that the helmets of the standard battle droids were originally in the Phantom Menace designed off of the Stormtrooper helmet, but just readjusted? And that's just one of the many cool details you can find in the making of episode 1, the Phantom Menace book, and currently I'm actually reading through the making of books like episode 1, 2, and 3. Unfortunately though, I've had like no time from YouTube and stuff this year, so even though I got that, I think at the beginning of January, I'm literally like 100 pages into the first one, and this is like a picture book we're talking about pretty much, so that is pretty sad, but I do really like those books a lot. Definitely would recommend them. Back to the video though, B1 Battledroids were designed originally by Battledroid Combat Automata and also the Battledroid Armor Workshop, who would go to the Geonosians themselves for the production of the droids. After Darth Sidious funded Poggle the Lesser, millions of droids were manufactured for the Trade Federation among the factories of Geonosis, such as the one destroyed in the Clone Wars, which I believe is also the one that Obi-Wan is looking into, and also the just droid factory scene from Attack of the Clones period, but I'm not exactly sure on that detail. And it's safe to assume that the Geonosians modeled the Battledroids off of themselves, since they look insanely similar, almost like an organic version. It's almost like that was done on purpose. Yeah, that's right, random person in the comments. I beat you to it before you could correct me, but seriously though, I do kind of get tired of the actually comments, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah. But yes, the Geonosians were originally what the Neimoidians of the Trade Federation were going to look like, as organic versions of their own droids, before George scrapped that idea and later used it for the Geonosians. And going back to what I said about the Stormtrooper pattern, the helmets did start out as that in concept art, which would later morph into the normal look we now well know. And apparently this was done to show an evolution of the evil side of galactic powers over the span of the movies. However, I'm glad this was changed with this story, as we later find out that if anything, the Separatists turned into the Rebellion and the Republic turned into the Empire. And yes, I know the Rebels aren't an exact descendant of the CIS, but they do have similarities when it comes to beliefs. And somebody please tell me if you know otherwise, but I believe we never get to see any prototype versions of the Battledroids before the final B1s. This is kind of disappointing because the only thing I have to now go off of for this video is concept art, which just isn't the same. And I was kind of hoping in the thumbnail to have a, prototype version of the B1 on the left side, but it's fine. In the field, these guys used E5 blaster rifles and wore comlink booster packs. They were also able to operate in space, as we see in the Clone Wars, and they would never surrender, but also treated self-preservation important enough to escape when necessary. And the droids were clumsy and intelligent compared to other troopers. And just because I say that doesn't mean I like it. But the overwhelming numbers of battle droids certainly made up for it, as they would usually kind of take control of battles by overwhelming the clone troopers. A 631 series droid that was inferior was also modeled, but so was the model series, which was made to become standardized and was much more intelligent.
Hands up, Jedi.
Mr. Bones, or Bones as his abbreviated name like R2 or 3PO, was a highly modified B1 from the canon series Star Wars Aftermath, one that I personally have been reading for the past few months, on book 3 right now, but it was painted red and had a murderous personality put in place by Temmin Wexley, which by the way took me a long time before I found out it's the same guy that's barely in the sequels that no one remembers other than he died in 9, but anyway, Bones always serves as the comic relief to lighten up the mood, as he is funny from the random urges to eliminate all enemies threatening his master. Even if it is a friend or family member of Temmin, he will still be okay with just killing them. Other than that group of droids from Rebels, almost all B1s were shut down by Vader after his killing of the Separatist Council. He had the bones of birds, fish, and other animals connected to his body, and limbs of some which were jagged, and one of his arms was replaced with a vibro blade. Half of the face was made up of a red telescoping eye, and Mr. Bones also had a sharp beak to resemble a bird of prey. I know that that's one term, and I know there's that one Terminator droid from the thumbnail, but I don't want to be too close to Eckhart's video, so just watch his if you really want to find out about those guys. I just thought they looked cool. And yeah, that's really most of the important battle droids that are in the Star Wars timeline. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. I upload every Friday and sometimes on Sunday too at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, I post shorts on Saturday, but yeah, see ya. Even though these early Stormtroopers from the Bad Batch have just been introduced, we already have pilots, mud troopers, security troopers, and way more that nobody asked for. So I know you guys are more invested in the clone and Stormtrooper designs than the actual shows at this point, so allow me to break down every canonical variation of the TK Trooper from the animated Star Wars universe we've seen so far, minus stuff from episode 5, because I'm making this video early, and unfortunately, unlike Dave Filoni, I haven't invented time travel yet. Like Clone Trooper Armor, TK Stormtrooper Armor comprised of white armor plates worn over a black body glove. Its most contrasting feature was the helmet, repurposed from the cancelled design for Phase 3 Clone Trooper Armor. It contained a single visor with 2 lenses, foregoing the Mandalorian-derived T-shaped visors of Clone Trooper helmets. It also contained a raised ridge that ran from directly above the visor to the back of the helmet, which kind of looked like a helmet on top of a helmet when you think about it. The standard issue weapon of the TK Stormtroopers was the DC-15A blaster carbine. Similar to the Clone Troopers immediately following the formation of the Empire, most TK armor used identical white plating, foregoing custom insignias, colors, and attachments. Some exceptions existed, such as how TK shock troopers were denoted by red markings on their armor, as well as red pauldrons, as we see in the finale to the Season 2 of the Bad Batch series, which is basically the only time we've ever seen the shock trooper variants, and it's a little bit random how it's like it's always the same guys and then we get these randomly, but they are pretty cool, I will admit. And going over sort of Imperial shock troopers, at least, it would appear that they were high-class stormtroopers selected from the Stormtrooper Corps of the Galactic Empire, and this new generation of shock troopers, predecessing the Clone Trooper shock troopers, specialized in heavy weapons on the battlefield, forming elite frontline forces of the Empire. They also served as high-end security forces on Coruscant, as well as bodyguards for Emperor Palpatine. So this is specifically from the Wikipedia article on the Imperial shock troopers, which was not really taking into account the actual TK variant, but it is very fair to assume that it would basically just be an early variant of this, and more or less the same thing in concept. Some TK stormtroopers stationed on the planet of Lao utilized brown armored ponchos and black goggles over the visors of their helmets, surely to help with the climate of this planet, which makes more sense when we realize that we see Omega as well as Captain Man here breathing out multiple times into the cold air, with us being able to see the puffs of steam from their mouths. But it is cool that we already see these guys having their own special, unique variants here and there, and as far as I'm concerned, I kind of consider these mud troopers, but more on that later. Conscription trooper pilots wore TK Stormtrooper armor that was outfitted with life support gear and air supply hoses that connected to the filtration system of their helmets. Or climbing out of the cockpit. One of the stormtroopers attempted to call for backup on his comm link, but the Imperials were subsequently attacked by Dryax, resulting in the deaths of the pilot and his stormtrooper passengers as well. Several months later, several conscription trooper pilots were deployed in V-Wing starfighters and ordered by Dr. Royce Hemlock to shoot down the rogue clones Omega and Crosshair, who were escaping Mount Santos in hijacked Roe-class transport shuttles. After being informed that the clone Omega's blood was vital to a clandestine Imperial project, Hemlock ordered for the pilots to break off their pursuit, as he did not want to damage his prize, so to speak. A contingent of shock troopers deployed to the clone army's homeworld of Kamino in the aftermath of Order 66 was there as well. With the end of the Clone Wars and Palpatine's ascension as Galactic Emperor, Imperial clone shock troopers became the elite forces of the new Galactic Empire. Though they retained their Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor during the early days of the Imperial era, in time the shock troopers upgraded to a customized version of Stormtrooper armor. By then the Empire had chosen to supplant clones with birth-born human soldiers, which is what we see the TK troopers actually being, and they still kind of suck, which is annoying, but whatever, maybe they'll get better later on in the show. Moving back over to the quote-unquote mud troopers, which from everything I've read, these guys don't really even count as mud troopers, but I think they kind of fit the design with the goggles and everything, and how they're just kind of in this colder, rundown planet. Anyway, actually looking over the Imperial Army troopers, they were outfitted with a set of armor similar to Imperial Officer Battle Armor, which covered the torso, shoulders, and upper arm. Sound familiar? Polarized goggles and respirator masks could be issued to filter out toxic substances in hostile environments, as seen on Mimban in Solo. The set also featured optional helmets, shin guards, a colored bicep bands that denoted the trooper's position, with red indicating a soldier and white indicating a medic. As seen within the Aldani garrison, troopers could forego the combat helmet in favor of an Imperial kepi. Troopers wore olive green, colored utility fatigues with and gray armor. Elite security troopers, such as those in the Ferrix garrison, were issued black utility fatigues and matching black armor. I'm willing to bet, though, that we will see some sort of black armored TK pilot troopers, which is basically going to be like an early variant of the TIE fighter pilots. I don't know this for sure, I just think it makes a good bit of sense that we could, as we transition into the real Stormtroopers, see some real TIE fighter pilots as well. And lastly, the one that I actually think is really cool that we probably will see at some point is if they keep leaning so far into Ralph McQuarrie's designs, we could actually see a special unit of TK troopers with their own lightsabers and shields as well, which might be something that is getting developed on Mount Tantus, and something Palpatine would be interested in with an army of troopers that actually use lightsabers and utilize a more sufficient combat base, perhaps influenced by their midi-chlorian counts, or M counts as they're called in the show. But anyway, that's it for this video. I actually have a few different announcements I want to shout out. One is make sure to become a member now, because there is actually a reason for once. Usually I just kind of say whatever, but we actually are doing a thing called What If Wednesdays, where anybody that becomes a member can suggest a what if idea to me, and I will make it immediately. I will make it that very week, and if not, it'll come out sometime within the next month, as long as it is relatively family friendly. So yeah, What If Wednesdays, it's going to be exclusive, members only, and I will just make literally whatever you want me to. Any Star Wars what if idea I will do for you. Also, this is probably like the last day the merch is going to be out, so there's not too much to be said about that. But yeah, if you missed the merch, then it is what it is. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad we got a couple purchases, but hopefully with our spring drop coming up in April, we'll get some more traction there. But anyway, that's it for this video. I upload videos multiple times a week. I also upload multiple shorts a week, but yeah, see ya. Everyone is talking about the Phase 3 clones and how that's basically what these new troopers in the Bad Batch are, but what about the phase in between 1 and 2? What about ARC troopers, who served as an experimental variant to give more highly skilled clones advanced armor and better gear? Today we'll be dissecting the differences between the canon and Legends clones, like Fives and Captain Fordo, as well as the unexplored side of ARC trooper colors and ranks and what they mean. First up is Rancor Battalion. This was a group of ARCs from canon that included members like Colt, Havoc, and Blitz, and helped with the training of other clone ARCs on Kamino like Echo and Fives. Colt was killed by Ventress, while Havoc died fighting a group of AQ series battle droids. Blitz ordered 2 ARF troopers to destroy a Trident-class assault ship, and the colors of Colt, Blitz, Havoc, and Hammer, another ARC trooper that was there during the Battle of Kamino, were simply customized palettes and didn't denote any specific rank amongst these 4. However, it is important to note that within Rancor Battalion, we have 2 more subclasses to analyze, that's being the ARC Commandos, like the 4 I mentioned before, and the ARF Scout Troopers that were identified by maroon and grayish-black markings on their helmets and arms, leading me to believe that these are the official colors of the battalion. Canon ARCs were equipped with either Phase 1 ARC Trooper Armor or Phase 2 ARC Trooper Armor, which there were slight differences in between, like the lack of a ridge on the second design, and also an altered visor area. They could also have double-sided pauldrons and breath mask survival gear. Numbering only 6, The Null-class Advanced Recon Commandos were the first clones of Jango Fett created by the Kaminoan cloners, and the prototypes for the Grand Army of the Republic. They were deemed a failure by the Kaminoans as a result of their genetic predisposition to independent thought. As a consequence of this extreme independence, they were not put into mass production, but were saved from termination by Mandalorian mercenary Kal Skirata, who later adopted all of them. All of the Nulls were named after Mandalorian warriors. The 6 Null arcs were known as Prudai, Kamerk, Meril, Jang, Ordo, and Adin. After completing their accelerated growth, they trained in Mandalorian military and survived survival combats to kill and destroy by any means possible. During training, the Nulls also endured near-death training torture to become resistant to interrogation. Kal taught his clones an interrogation resistance technique of shutting out reality to become someone who is not being interrogated. This technique could be done by visualizing putting the pain and fear in a box, and then by concentrating on its physical reality so minutely that it's fragmented and ceased to register, by imagining that one were somewhere else, or by focusing on the next moment one could bear to think about, the next meal, second, or step, time after time until the ordeal ended. Their physiology was greatly improved. They were stronger, faster, and heavier than basic clone troopers, and that is of course for the Nulls, who were basically the sort of phase 1 for ARC troopers. Now for the Alpha class, although these arcs were created with unaltered independent minds just like their Null class predecessors, this second generation of arcs were more obedient and reliable to the Jedi because Jango had instructed the Alpha class arcs to follow their orders. However, this did not stop the arcs from voicing their disagreements or even their opinion of a Jedi's order that the arcs saw as incompetent or lacking of enough strategy, which is kind of funny to think. Like, you never would see this from normal clone troopers, but imagine like an ARC trooper like one of these just going up to their Jedi and be like, yeah man, your plan sucks. I don't know. I want to see that in the Clone Wars at some point, but I guess it's too late now. There was also a tense rivalry between the Null class and Alpha class arcs during the Clone Wars. Although the Alpha class arcs naturally inherited Jango's solitary nature, they did carry a sense of pride in the fact that they were part of a great military force. Furthermore, they respected the fighting and leadership styles exhibited in virtually all of the Jedi. The Null's blatant disregard for any Jedi and Republic authority was seen by the Alpha arcs as an insult to the entire clone army. Whereas the majority of the Alpha arcs were loyal only to the Galactic Republic and followed the Jedi's leadership to a certain extent, the Null arcs swore their loyalty to only Kal Skirata. Hence, the Alpha arc troopers saw the Nulls as a renegade clone force and a shame to Jango Fett's legacy as a whole. Fordo, also known as the designations of Alpha 77 and Arc 77, was an Alpha class Advanced Recon Commando captain in the Grand Army of the Republic, born on Kamino. In 22 BBY, he was assigned to task a force led by the Jedi Knight General Obi-Wan Kenobi to take the Confederate-held world of Munilist. Together with a group of clone troopers that would later come to be known as the Munilist 10, Fordo proved instrumental in the Battle of Munilist, leading his troops to destroy an enemy artillery emplacement and then helping Kenobi capture the enemy leader Sand Hill. That's being the leader of the Banking clan. Now next up is the Rail class ARC Trooper, and having made only the mistake of indoctrinating the original Fett clones with absolute loyalty to the Empire, to the Republic and not the Empire, and thus the Empire, the Kaminoans sought to rectify their error by discreetly breeding a new clone army that was completely obedient to their Kaminoan creators. While the majority of the army, composed of anti-troopers or a special force of elite soldiers, were created to complement the regular soldiers. Hence, the Kaminoans engineered a new generation of advanced recon commandos, the Rail-class ARC Troopers. Under the observation of the Kaminoans, the Rail-class ARCs and the rest of the Rebel clones were grown and trained for nearly a decade. The Rail-class ARC Troopers were equipped with the ARC variant Phase 1 armor, which included the command pauldron and commas. Their primary weapon was the chain gun. Approximately 20 years after the Kaminoans created the first clone army for the Republic, the Sith Lord Darth Vader sent to the 501st Legion to destroy the rebel clones and bring Kamino back into line. The 501st mission commander was the bounty hunter Boba Fett, who happened to be a clone of Jango Fett. While the anti-troopers defended Topeka City's outer perimeter, the Rail-class ARC troopers remained within the cloning facility to protect the batches of undeveloped rebel clones. And this is from Legends, of course, obviously that's not canon. Now with the Arc Heavy Gunners, which is our last class to look at today, they were wielding high-powered rapid-firing weapons such as the reciprocating quad blaster or the Z6 rotary blaster cannon. They were the scourge of separatist vehicles such as the Hailfire droid, and their specialized armor was equipped with a direct feed from their helmets HUDs to their heavy weapons, granting them extra targeting capabilities. So there are other color variations and things like that among the arcs, but that doesn't change the fact that these are the main classes here, which are worth looking at, as all the others are mainly just Battlefront 2 skins that you see here and there, and not really worth diving into if you ask me at least. Or I could do a separate video on those if you want me to, like the Umbra class in Battlefront 2. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. Videos every single Friday, also shorts every single week. And yeah, we have a new spring line of merch coming out very soon. Also become a member if you want to support the channel. But yeah, see ya. Have you ever wondered where the Kaminoans got the Clone Trooper armor design from? Well, obviously Mandalorians, but what if I told you that thousands of years earlier, the Old Republic had their own form of troopers who were powerful? So today, I'll explore the differences between Old Republic troopers, Phase 1 clones, Phase 2 clones, and even how the First Order made their Stormtroopers a mix between Imperial troops and the clones before them. So for a quick history lesson here, the Republic Army was created in 25,053 BBY at the birth of the Republic and had soldiers that were enforced to protect the galaxy from evil for millennia, and the army would be reconstituted in 3,951 BBY during the Mandalorian Wars, with some of our earliest models of soldiers here who had an admittedly more primitive design with red and gold armor that had grenades and blasters, and also exposed face areas of helmets of varying appearance. A variant of Republic Trooper from this area were the Rocket Jumper Elite Advanced Unit, which were also known as the REAU, and they were equipped with rocket packs and had two main objectives in battle: to hold the line until reinforcements from standard troopers arrived, and also to serve as reconnaissance troops for rescue and quick response missions. They were once ambushed by Juggernaut war droids at the Monument Plaza on Coruscant, and they were disbanded in 1000 BBY when the Republic military was converted into judicial forces. So this is not the first case of one of these troopers, which we'll see coming back later in history, especially around the Clone Wars era with those jetpack troopers, which we see the Wolfpack utilizing a lot of. The Republic troopers from around 3,635 BBY, however, were made during the Old Galactic Republic to defend against Sith and their forces during and after the Great Galactic War. This even included a Special Forces division that was developed after a hesitant truce was signed between the winning Sith Empire and Republic in 3,653 BBY, known as the Treaty of Coruscant. These Special Forces troops had bulkier Durasteel and even Cortosis armor. Cortosis was a material that could briefly stop lightsabers, as well as helmets that vaguely resembled the airborne clone helmets that would be used 4,000 or so years later. Jace Malcolm was a human male that was given leadership over Elite Infantry Unit 326, aka Havoc Squad, which was positioned during the height of the war at Alderaan, where the Sith invaded, leading to the Battle of Alderaan, and Malcolm would personally lead an ambush in the woods on these Sith warriors, where he would fight and wrestle with the Sith Lord Darth Malgus, which admittedly was with the help of Satele Shan, but let's be honest, Malcolm carried that fight anyway. I mean, look at him wrestling this guy over here, bro, that's crazy. The brave actions of these soldiers would lead to the massive Republic victory on this scenic planet, which, by the way, I never even realized that this cinematic here takes place during Alderaan, but it kind of makes sense the more I think about it, and I kind of wish we saw more action on Alderaan after seeing it. The normal Old Republic troopers, however, had armor that was designed to be the best in the galaxy at the time and allowed for great protection and movement in battle, which gave them a wide range of combat scenarios to be considered experts in. The Havoc Squad Special Forces armor was similar despite having orange and red markings, as well as bandoliers and pauldrons as some extra accessories. The Old Republic were notable for using more powerful blaster rifles than seen before in the galaxy, which were updated every year to keep up with the climate of the war with the Sith. And I wonder if it's just Jace here, or if like all of these warriors are just like way more powerful than your average clone trooper, but the fact that they could put up a fight with a Sith, especially a Sith like Darth Malgus, is honestly pretty crazy to think about. Moving over to 32 BBY, when Jango Fett was appointed by Count Dooku to be the template for a clone army designed by Darth Sidious for the Republic to later use. Yeah, I know, it's pretty convoluted, but Fett would not only serve as the base to be cloned off of, but would also help with designing the armor, which had similarities to the Mandalorian Shock Trooper armor he wore, from the plating to the T-shaped visor. He would also help oversee the flash training regimen for the clones. Speaking of plates though, this variant of the Republic Trooper evolution process had 20 plates of form-fitting lightweight plastoid alloy composite on top of a sealed black body glove, which would protect them from outer space. Now here comes the big question. How come Old Republic Trooper armor and clone armor, which were spaced thousands of years apart, appear very similar in form? Well, one good answer is that the armor does technically aspire from one military group that was around from back then, and it's not the Republic troops, but instead the Mandalorians, who, remember, were still wearing war-driven armor even back then, and that's where the main connection comes from, as the Old Republic troops were probably designed to help against the Mandalorian armor, whereas the clone armor is basically just an updated version of Mandalorian armor. However, while Phase 1 was good for its strong plating, Phase 2 is where the design was changed to allow for better movement and functionality amongst clone brothers, which could be seen as a good thing or a downside. And like I mentioned earlier, you got the airborne helmets, which look similar way back then as they do now. And even some of the other helmets just don't look too far off. Obviously, they have different visor shapes and stuff, but like the helmets themselves are kind of similar. Before the Phase 2 armor change, however, we had ARC Troopers, and while one set of Phase 1 ARC Trooper armor had a normal T-shaped visor like what we see with Captain Fordo in the Munilist 10, but the other type of Phase 1 ARC armor had the back, sides, and fin of a typical Phase 1 clone helmet with a new experimental faceplate that would one day be the Phase 2 clone, with the exception of a slightly more triangular shaping. This did serve as the prototype, or Phase 1.5 for Phase 2, and when the Reg armor changed phases, ARC Phase 2 armor would roll out, which was much closer to standard Phase 2 clones. Keep in mind though that all types of ARC Trooper armor, Phase 1 or 2, came with accessories like commas and etc. But normal Phase 2 clone armor issued in 20 BBY had a visor with a more modern take on combat visibility, as well as an updated armor structure. It's important to know that the original reason for this armor change in Revenge of the Sith coming out of Attack of the Clones was a clear transition into the days of the Stormtrooper with a more skeletal helmet rather than the one with a Mandalorian design like before. Lastly for today, if we cut way ahead to the First Order Stormtrooper, which, by the way, do many of you guys really like that design? I mean, personally, I never really liked it. I feel like it was too clean and, I don't know, kind of bulky looking. But then again, I believe The Last Jedi apparently fixed it a little bit and made it look a little bit better, so I guess we could kind of compare those two here. But the troopers of the First Order were actually similar to the clones, more so than normal stormtroopers, in the sense that while Imperial troops were conscripted from volunteers, the First Order took babies from their families, similar to the Jedi, and practically trained them from birth, like the clones. Also, their intense training regimen modeled that of flash training, we talked about earlier with the clone troopers. General Brindle Hux and his son Armitage Hux somehow viewed their armies as the Jedi's legacy. They also had black body gloves and flamethrower troopers, but they did have flamethrower troopers similar to the clones as well, even if overall they bear the closest resemblance to the Stormtroopers. In essence, they are the final canon Republic troopers so far. If when we talk about Republic, we're talking about the biggest military might, otherwise it'd be the New Republic, but they don't really have troops. All of those are lame, so yeah. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. There's also a join button, which is completely optional, but would truly help me out in the channel, and I really would appreciate it if you guys would be down to do that. Also, we have a new spring merch drop, which is going to be going out of stock soon, as I'll be moving into summer and getting some new clothes with that as well, so stay tuned for whatever new designs are going to be coming out. We also stream almost every Saturday now, so don't miss those. These types of videos come out every Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I also post shorts on Saturday and Sunday, but yeah, see ya. Is it just me, or are more and more Star Wars characters adapting to lightsabers? Well, today I'll be explaining every lightsaber-proof armor and substances from Beskar used by Mandalorians to Fool's Kyber and even Cortosis featured in the Acolyte. So Cortosis ore was a very rare and brittle substance that would temporarily cause lightsabers to short out on contact due to its energy-resistant nature. It could also deflect blaster fire. The ore, when unrefined, was unexplainably energized and would kill anyone who touched it with their bare hands. The material was used as a dagger by the Jedi Shaddai Potkin, who would forget that Darth Vader was more a master of the Force than he was of lightsaber dueling anyway, and he would then kill all the Jedi there, including Shaddai, who Vader snapped the neck of. In the Acolyte, Quimar, I don't know, also known as the Stranger, was adorned in Cortosis armor, which he used to short out the lightsabers of many Jedi he fought on the jungle planet Kofar. Not only was his sensory deprivation helmet laced with Cortosis, but also his left gauntlet, both of which he used in his duel with the Jedi to deflect and short out lightsabers, sometimes by simply headbutting them. Mandalorian iron, or as it was also known in the Mandalorian language as Beskar, was an incredibly strong material which in its most pure form could deflect blaster bolts and lightsaber strikes as well. It is stated in canon that it could only repel lightsabers for some time, as I would imagine if Mando got cut in the chest piece 10 different times in a row, it would probably break. Maybe that's something we'll see in the movie, not sure. It could also be damaged by weapons made out of Beskar, like Beskar spears, and Din Djarin used it in his fight against Moff Gideon, who was using the Darksaber, and his spear was able to withstand multiple strikes and saber locks from the legendary lightsaber. The Colon Crystal, also known as Fool's Kyber, was a type of crystal only known to be found on Pijal's moons, and Pijal is a plant, by the way. Even though they had a weaker utility than lightsabers, they were actually even more rare than true Kyber crystals. On a visual level, the crystals appeared the same, but were microscopically different and had an orange appearance. A group known as the Black Guards on one of the moons used the crystals to make their own energy shields, which were lightsaber proof, and when Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi traveled to that system to inspect the terrorist activity there, they came in contact with this group and fought against them. They would later find out that the crystals could make an unusually low-powered orange blade, which was able to cut through those shields made by the same substance. Next up is the Magna Guard staffs, which were made of frick and also called electro staffs. They were created by Battledroid Armor Workshop and Hollow-One Mechanicals, and funny enough, were not only used by the Separatists with the IG-100 Magna Guard, but also by the Republic with the Shock Troopers, who used yellow electro staffs at times, such as during Cad Bane's prison escape. The frick alloy they were made comes from frick, which was very durable and light, but also quite expensive, and was so strong that in one extreme case, a container of it, which was on Alderaan at the time of the Death Star's first test at full power, it actually managed to survive intact. And the dual lightsabers created by Darth Sidious were also made from Frick, which makes him even more deadly in battle, as his weapons could not be destroyed with a lightsaber, the weapon of a Jedi. One of the Knights of Ren, called Vikrul, had a scythe which was constructed with Frick and therefore needed greater pressure from a lightsaber than usual in order to be cut through. It is said that the Light's armor was made from Frick at points in galactic history too. So for Electron Walls, this is an entry that of course isn't used for armor, as that would be impossible, but is still lightsaber proof nonetheless. These are the doors of the red lasers you see in the Phantom Menace, and are also known as laser gates, and were used to block high security or dangerous areas by closing them with a wall of energy. They were strong enough to block a lightsaber strike and would disintegrate all that would come through it, which I don't know if I never really thought about that. I guess I kind of thought like even their bodies, if they try to like kick it, it would just bounce back like their lightsabers. But it turns out if like say Obi-Wan tried to walk through this here, he would be turned into ash, as would his apprentice one day, but that's a story for another time. And armor weave was a material that could be fused with fabric such as capes as well as armor to provide a meager yet noticeable defense against blasters and lightsabers. It was supposed to dissipate the energy of blaster shots, but only provided a small amount of resistance to lightsabers, as we can see when Zam Wessel gets her arm chopped off, as she was wearing some armor weave there. It was supposed to be flexible and would allow you to fight effectively while still wearing the armor weave. Also, the real-world equivalent to armor weave would be Kevlar, which is famously used for modern bulletproof vests, which are also somewhat flexible, and some examples of armor weave used by warriors include the armor and garb of the Jedi Temple Guards, as well as the Serenian cloak of Count Dooku from the planet Serena, where he's from, and then the armor and cape of Captain Phasma as well. Another lightsaber resistant material is ultra chrome, which could be used as a substitute for cortosis and also could protect against radiation, similar to chromium, another substance which was also used in Captain Phasma's armor, which, fun fact, came from the salvaged remains of one of Palpatine's yachts, as chromium was commonly used on Naboo ships as a sign of royalty. During the Clone Wars, it was seen as respectable for separatist nobles to have swords made of ultrachrome. Those blades were highly resistant to lightsabers, and when the energy field of a lightsaber contacted with ultrachrome, it would be dispersed evenly across the entire surface rather than concentrated in one spot. This meant that if the lightsaber was there for long enough, though, that the entire piece would melt. I feel like that's a cool thing that I would like to see at some point. And it would probably look like in the LEGO games where you like damage something and it slowly becomes red, but I'm not sure, we haven't gone there. So Imperial Inquisitors also used ultrachrome in their armor, although it apparently wasn't that strong, considering that Maul killed the fifth brother so quickly. Uranium was one of the most resistant materials in the galaxy and could protect from radiation as well as briefly block lightsaber energy. It was used in some of Chancellor Palpatine's statues. Song steel is a material from Legends that could block lightsabers more effectively than many of the materials on here, and was used in swords so strong that the user could even fight against two lightsaber wielders at once. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. Also check out the live streams we do every Friday night. And if you would like to check out the merch store as well for some cool summer merch on there, I upload normal videos every Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also shorts every single day. But yeah, see ya. If that didn't explain it enough to you, today I'll be thoroughly explaining every Stormtrooper variant, and while the expanded universe has introduced hundreds of different types, today I'll just be analyzing the 14 most important Stormtrooper classes, while also looking at some of the troopers that came before and after, like TK troopers, and also Thrawn's zombie night troopers. Starting off with the iconic Stormtrooper, they had armor made up of white plastoid plates over a black body glove, and their armor was able to dissipate the effects of blaster bolts that were fired at them. Also, the stark white armor was meant to show a transition from the honor and defense of the clone troopers to the new order that was the Empire. The skull-like helmet shapes were meant to install fear in their enemies. Also, they used E11 blaster rifles and had knee plates which allowed them to take aim in kneeling position. The name Stormtroopers means that they came from the storm of galactic history, or essentially the turning point in galactic power, which they came out as the victors of. Sand Troopers, on the other hand, were a specialized unit that worked in desert environments, which is why they were also called Desert Troopers, and their helmets came equipped with cooling fans and a helmet sand filter, which according to TD7556 didn't work very well. Additionally, they wore a SD-48 survival pack and often used creatures like dewbacks to get around efficiently.
I do love sand. It's soft and smooth and pleasant, and it stays out of your armor.
Snowtroopers were the opposite of Sand Troopers in that they were used in extreme cold environments rather than extreme hot environments. They had insulated armor with unique helmets and a heated breather mask, which had battery packs that lasted up to 2 standard weeks. And standard simply means the basic real-world measurement that humans on Earth would use. Also, they came with ice boots, insulated belt commas, polarized snow goggles, grappling hooks, ion flares, and homing beacons. Scout troopers were used for reconnaissance, so when the military surveys the land to understand their position better, as well as the enemy position too, they had lighter armor and used the 74 SC speeder bike to maneuver across terrain quickly. They had helmets with retractable faceplates, survival rations on pouches on their belts, and power units backpacks for extra gear. Also, there was an EC-17 holdout blaster located on a pouch on their ankles. Death Troopers were elite soldiers who were used for stealth, espionage, and lethality with much higher kill numbers than their Stormtrooper counterparts. The Death Trooper helmets had advanced sensor and targeting systems, and they always came equipped with E11D blaster carbines and C25 fragmentation grenades, as well as pauldrons which denoted rank similar to Sand Troopers, except they appeared black and colorless to all who weren't looking through a Stormtrooper visor. Shore Troopers operated on coastal and tropical settings, making their use very sparse, as there weren't very many Imperial stations located at such areas. They had tan-colored armor with bands indicating their rank, red for standard troopers, squad leaders had sand blue stripes and a comma, shore trooper captains had fully blue breastplates, and also less upper leg armor for enhanced movements. The troopers used E11 blasters and E22 reciprocating double-barreled blaster rifle. Range troopers, on the other hand, had similar helmets to shore troopers and tank troopers, which is another variant worth mentioning, but they also had external fur and notably chest plates which were comparable to Imperial Snow Trooper we went over earlier. They also had magnetic Kryptonian boots, which allowed for secure footing on fast-moving vehicles. They were the toughest of Palpatine's military and were mainly used for surveying and defending frontier planets, which were susceptible to rebel occupation. Mortar troopers, also referred to as artillery stormtroopers, had basic Stormtrooper armor with yellow paintings and explosive loaded backpacks. They maintained indirect fire weapons like the Model 201 mortar system, Dark Troopers were experimental troopers created as a part of the Galactic Empire's Dark Trooper program, with the Phase 2 Dark Troopers being a heavily armored suit worn by a human pilot, and they were used at the Battle of Tatooine, but the last weakness of the trooper was identified to be the human inside, so the Phase 3 Dark Troopers were droids. The 3rd generation Dark Troopers were blaster resistant, heat resistant, and had rocket boosters and extreme strength. Incinerator Troopers had the same armor as Mortar Troopers, with red stripes instead of yellow ones, and they utilized a D-72W Oppressor flame projector with a backpack. They were subjugated to intense fire training and were deadly for burning their enemies alive or by destroying their encampments. Night Troopers were the final remaining Stormtroopers who served Grand Admiral Thrawn still in 9 ABY when he was sent to the extragalactic planet Peridia aboard the Star Destroyer Chimera, and they served under the Grand Captain of the Guard, Enoch. They had weathered armor which had cracks and breakages filled with gold and silver, as well as bands of red cloth tied around them to look cool. Okay, I made the last part up, but seriously, why would they need to put these bands on? Is it just to look mysterious? I don't know. They also used E-11 blasters and had TIE pilots with red stripes on their helmets, as well as at least 2 Death Troopers with augmented armor. When these soldiers fell in battle, they would be awakened in an undead form by the chant of resurrection from the Great Mothers, but could be knocked down again with dismembering lightsaber strikes. Captain Enoch had damaged armor lined with gold similar to the other Night Troopers, with gold and silver lining. Also, he possessed a burgundy body glove and crimson gloves. His faceplate was made of gold and had a humanoid appearance which was hammered into it. Patrol Troopers were the urban equivalent of the Scout Troopers and were used to cover the dense, sprawling cities of Imperial planets aboard their CPH patrol speeder bikes. They had no armor on their legs for swifter movements and were more or less a police force. They used EC-17 holdout blasters, the same weapons used by the Scout Troopers, and had an enlarged helmet's dome to give them enhanced imaging electronics. Through their helmet feeds, they also got real-time traffic data, construction, and other possible obstacles that could be on their routes throughout the city. The Purge Troopers worked alongside the Inquisitors to hunt down the few remaining Jedi of the galaxy. Most galactic citizens were unaware that they even existed in the first place, and they were the last clones used from Jango Fett's DNA template before they were phased out by conscripted individuals. The early Purge Trooper armor was the same black Phase 2 armor used by the Empire's elite squad troopers, but with green visors and a darker black stripe down the middle of the helmet and limb armor. Phase 1 Purge Trooper armor looked like clone paratrooper armor but with black and red coloration. The Phase 2 Purge Trooper armor was more similar to that of Stormtroopers and was less bulky, but with the same color scheme as before.
In the description of this video, you will find a link to DBB Store. If you wish to support the Republic, you should check out the new fall merch drop. Not only are there new sweatpants and sweaters with the messages of deleted scene and Dooku head,
but there's also some fire Anakin streetwear too. Wait, are those younglings over there?
TK Troopers were a transition point in between the clone troopers of the Republic and early Empire into the standard Imperial Stormtrooper armor. They came from the first wave of naturally born human recruits and had different visors and helmets. That was part of their prototype armor based off of the cancelled Phase 3 clone armor, and also used DC-15A blaster carbines like the clones before them. They were trained by clone commandos, making them more knowledgeable in combat than later stormtroopers, and had the variants of TK shock troopers with red armor and pauldrons, as well as the TK mud trooper who would wear ponchos and protective goggles. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can subscribe if you want to. Also consider checking out the new merch drop for the brand new fall merch that just came out last week with some very cool Anakin Street wear. Please leave a comment down below if you have any questions about this video, or if any video suggestions, or just want to let me know how your week's been going. I upload normal videos every Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I also post shorts every single day. But yeah, see ya. Stormtrooper Armor has gone through a lot of change over the years. This video will explain the full history of this armor, from Phase 1 clones, to the TK troopers, to even the First Order Stormtroopers. This will answer the question fans have wondered for years: which era of trooper was the best? But before we look at the clones and Stormtroopers, we need to analyze the old Republic troopers who served 3,600 years before the Clone Wars against the Sith Empire. Despite this, their armor is very similar to the Clone Trooper armor we will look at soon. This has caused some to dislike the similar appearance with the white plating and bulky armor, but the armor of the Republic troopers was actually much different. This armor was not only adaptable, but could also survive blaster fire and even bomb blasts. So despite being such an early prototype of Star Wars trooper armor, they were by no means weak. But even more impressive were their blasters, which were changed every year by Republic engineers to make them more heavy and powerful. Therefore, the Republic was able to survive this threat from the Sith Empire. 1,000 years after the Sith had been destroyed at the Battle of Ruusan, a new era of soldier was produced. The clone army of Kamino was created by Chancellor Palpatine or Darth Sidious undercover to provide the Republic with an army to fight against the Separatists. This would in turn create a war to distract the Jedi. Master Sifo Dyas ordered the army from the Kaminoans, which used the bounty hunter Jango Fett as a template for a clone army. When the Jedi strike team sent to rescue Obi-Wan Kenobi was outnumbered and surrounded by the Separatists at the Petranaki Arena on Geonosis, Yoda arrived with the Phase 1 clone troopers to reinforce the battle. This catastrophic event would be known as the Battle of Geonosis. The Clone Wars lasted for 3 years, from 22 BBY till 19 BBY, and the Phase 1 troopers were used for the first year or so of the war. The armor had similarities to Mandalorian armor with its T-shaped visor and was apparently uncomfortable to wear due to the Kaminoans' inexperience towards the human body. And can you imagine if the clone troopers were all Kaminoan clones with giraffe necks? I mean, Yerl Poof would have been proud. The armor was made of lightweight plastoid alloy composite and was made up of 20 pieces that surrounded a black body glove that could briefly protect troopers from the vacuum of space, as well as extreme temperatures, whether hot or cold. For a brief time period during Phase 1, colors on the armor were used to show rank, but this was quickly replaced when color started to be used to show Legion and Independence. The armor was customizable with other additions like pauldrons, visors, and or macro binoculars, and the helmet had a comlink, life support system, and a tracking device. It's no wonder the clones were superior to the Battledroids, considering all the tech that they had. It almost makes you feel bad for the droids. Almost.
I still can't seem to hit anything.
But like I said, the Phase 1 armor only lasted about a year, and in 21 BBY, the armor was slowly replaced by the Phase 2 armor, which had been tested by the Advanced Recon Commandos, or ARC Troopers for short. The new armor was more comfortable, durable, and allowed for better adjustments for specialty troopers. Also, with this new armor, all clone legions started to be identified by different colors that covered covered their armor. For example, blue for the 501st, orange for the 212th, and camo for the 41st Elite Legion. The helmets were redesigned to have a filtration system for an external breathing device in non-breathable atmospheres and was also more comfortable to wear. But even though Phase 2 armor was lighter and more durable, it also cost much more than Phase 1 at a total of 3,000 credits per suit, which was much heavier than the cost of Phase 1, which was just 2,000 credits per suit. When the Empire started in 19 BBY, after Order 66, when the clones followed the order to kill all the Jedi in the galaxy, the clones would be used for many more years, even until 16 BBY, when they were then slowly moved out to be replaced by the next trooper in town. Governor Tarkin, as well as Admiral Rampart, decided that the cost of clones was not efficient, and they then started Project War Mantle to start deploying conscripted non-clone soldiers to use instead of the costly clones. After a meeting with Lama Su, the Prime Minister of Kamino, Rampart put Crosshair, the only loyal member of Clone Force 99, left in charge of 4 of the first Stormtroopers, where their first mission was to wipe out Saw Gerrera's rebels on the moon of Onderon, as well as the traitorous civilians that were there helping them. The trooper ES-01 was executed by Crosshair after refusing to kill unarmed civilians, but other than that, the mission was a success, which led to 1,000 recruits being trained at a facility on Darrow under veteran clone commandos. These first generation stormtroopers, or TK stormtroopers as they were officially called, were used during the first years of the Empire. They had similar armor to the Phase 2 clone troopers, but with a different single visor that was not T-shaped like previous models. The summit of the helmet contained a raised ridge that went from the visor to the back of the helmet. And also the DC-15A blaster carbine was the standard blaster used by these troopers. Eventually, sometime after 16 BBY, the Phase 2 clones and TK troopers were replaced by the new and improved Stormtroopers, which would be used by the Empire from the Dark Times till the destruction of the Empire at the Battle of Jakku. The advantages of the Stormtroopers was that they were not nearly as costly as the former troopers, as they were volunteered and also had nearly endless amounts of troops, as they came from all corners of the galaxy. The standard troopers carried an E11 medium blaster rifle and were named Stormtroopers after the storm of galactic history. The troopers were infamous for their sometimes poor aim, which would only be caused because of their lackluster helmets that were hard to see through. However, this has certainly been over-exaggerated by some fans, as we see many times in the movies such as on the Tantive 4 and A New Hope, that the troopers are able to easily mow through rebels. Many different specialty troopers were made to enforce the Empire in specific situations, such as the Sand Troopers, which fought on desert planets such as Tatooine, also the Snow Trooper, which was created for operations on freezing ice planets such as Hoth. Then also the Scout Trooper, which was an advanced trooper for intel missions that often came equipped with a speeder bike for fast escapes. Other specialty troopers that we won't go over in this video include shore troopers, range troopers, patrol troopers, death troopers, and dark troopers, which were actually droids. But the Galactic Empire was extremely versatile. What I mean by this is that they had a large navy of Star Destroyers and TIE Fighters that were manned by pilots and officers alike. But the material used for Stormtrooper armor was very similar to the clone suits used before them that were in some cases recycled for the new variants. While the armor protected the troopers from mild blaster fire and extreme weather, it also made running harder with the plated material and was no use against large pulse detonations and blunt weapons as well. But real quick, in case you are new to this channel, this is the brief segment where I give some self-improvement advice. And today we are actually looking at Luke 180 from the Bible, and if that's not your kind of thing, then you can skip to this time right here. But today, in Luke 180, it actually says, talking about John the Baptist, "The child grew and became strong in spirit, and he was in the wilderness until the day he appeared publicly to Israel." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. What I took from this is that, John, as was also the case for Jesus, even if it was an admittedly shorter time, was basically raised in the wilderness and spent all this time in the wilderness where he became strong in spirit. And I feel like, there are many of us right now in our lives where we feel like we're really struggling, really suffering, and we're really waiting on something. There's something that's going to happen, but we just feel like we're far from it and there's no way we're going to get there. But you need to think of it in the sense that this is our wilderness, and by going through this, suffering through this, as is the case in many of our lives, we are actually growing stronger in spirit and aligning more with what God has planned for both you and me as well. And as we get back into the video, this is just a quick reminder that you can leave a like on this video if you enjoy it, as it does very much push out the video to more people, but it is all up to you, of course. So yeah, let's get back to it. When the Empire was defeated at the Battle of Jakku in 5 ABY, the use of Stormtrooper armor became irrelevant, and the Empire was all but in the past. But when the First Order rose to power, which had been developing in the unknown regions, under the command of Kylo Ren, Supreme Leader Snoke, and General Hux, new stormtroopers that were trained from birth, known as First Order Stormtroopers, were used in combat against the Resistance and other supporters of the New Republic. In a way, the First Order armor was a crossover of all the previous armies, as it had similar qualities to both the clone armor and Stormtrooper armor. Therefore, the flexibility of the armor was increased from former variants. The helmet had a Battleplast finish, and also had targeting as well as communication systems for the troopers. Also, it contained a constant stream of data, which showed the amount of ammo left in their blasters, as well as an ID for other troopers whenever they looked at each other through their lenses. Later, an army consisting of a red variant of the First Order Stormtrooper, known as the Sith Troopers, were raised for the Final Order, but they were quickly destroyed at the Battle of Exegol in 35 ABY. But let me ask you something, what was the one point of having all of these troopers in the first place? That's right, war. And if you want to know the 10 bloodiest battles of the Clone Wars, then you should click this video right now.
Do it.